morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser, and appreciate you tuning in on this. What is today? What is today? It's a Thursday. Yeah, it's a Thursday. All the days are blurring together. It is going to be a kind of a grab bag of when I go live. So if you haven't already, click like, click subscribe, and click the bell to get notified when I go live here on YouTube. I highly recommend it. My wife is off on a girls' not weekend. She's off for the next 10 days, gallivanting around the East Coast with college friends, college roommates, and having a great time. My son is at his school, so I'm doing the single dad thing. And as it happened this morning, my son woke up at like 5:30 because our cat was crying outside of his room. And normally that would be a bad thing, but I was like, you know what? There's an early tea time available, and my son loves to go golfing with me. We're going to get up, we're going to get out, and we're going to go golfing before the rest of the world. So we just finished. You can see I got golf attire on. I'm trying to make pink happen here. I don't know if I'm working it out, but we we had a good time. We had a good time. Rough start to the round, but shot a 42 on the back and probably should have broke 40. So it was all right, and was striking the ball pretty well, and I can handle that. So I am really excited about today's show, as a matter of fact, because I am really enjoying going through the different position groups in the NFC West, getting familiarized, really like looking at them, looking at their numbers, looking at some of the advanced metrics, seeing where I think these players and these position groups rank in the NFC West, and then looking at other, maybe more objective third-party measurements of these groups. We've got PFF measurements, we've got rankings, we've got Mike Clay from ESPN does position group rankings, and I look at those after I've done my look. And the wide receiver room is one in particular where I think is one of the more not just fascinating aspects of this division, but I think it's going to be pivotal. I think the wide receiver rooms for each of these teams are going to potentially make or break the fortunes of each of these teams. And Seahawks fans are very familiar with the changes that they've made with, sending DK Metcalf out, sending Tyler Lockett out, adding in Cooper Kupp, adding in Marquez Valdez-Scantling, adding in some rookies, all that stuff. We'll go through the rooms in just a moment. But I don't know if people realize that there's a lot of upheaval in other rooms in this division and what's gone on for the 49ers. And I'll talk about a little bit of injury news relative to Brandon Ayuk and other things for that team. And the Cardinals that didn't make a really big move at the receiver position, despite the fact you could argue they might have needed to do something like that, especially in the draft. And then the Rams, who have brought in, a veteran who a lot of people are very excited about, but also we'll take a look and see exactly how he did last year when we get into some of these numbers. So I'm really intrigued to see how this shakes out. I don't have my answer yet. I never do when I start the show of what my rankings will be. We're going to go through the groups together. Going to hear your perspectives as well. I've got your chat now showing up here on the stream so other people can see what you guys are all saying and what you think as well. And before I get into the rankings today, a couple things I wanted to follow up on. So first, just repeating some news from yesterday that the Seahawks signed Shaquille Griffin, the cornerback, to fill out their cornerback room. And worth noting, they signed him to a $3 million one-year deal that can be worth as much as $4 million. And I've seen some Seahawks fans portray this as a signing that is really to compete with Josh Jobe for a starting position. I think that that's somewhat the case, but actually what I really believe to be true is that he is there to compete with Nehemiah Pritchett and Shamar Jean-Charles and some of the backups to add some depth. I don't think he's really competing with them. I think he will be on the roster as a veteran unless some of those young guys just really ball out. And the other thing I've seen is, I'm disappointed they didn't go and get like Jalen Ramsey or something. Well, I think what's really demonstrated here is they signed this guy for $3 million 1 year. That should demonstrate to you that they are not looking to add a starter in the cornerback room. And they, they were not going to be in the running for a guy like Jalen Ramsey at this point for his cost at over $20 million a year, and likely also some, off-field question marks in terms of how he is within that locker room. So I wanted to share a little bit more there on that front. The other thing, and this is really, really cool, I'm excited to share, added a new feature to the hbtix.com site. So you can now go to hbtix.com. This is a look at it here. This is the Hawk Blogger Ticket Exchange. This is the only place where you can buy Seahawks tickets from Seahawks fans and sell Seahawks tickets to Seahawks fans. We want to keep Seahawks fans in the seats. If you go to StubHub, if you go to Ticketmaster, those places you can't control who buys them. Here, at least, you can find a Seahawks fan who's interested. And if you still want to sell it via Ticketmaster, you still can. But you'll be able to do that with the person, with the Seahawks fan you find here. I've got instructions on how to do all that. But the thing that's exciting that I wanted to share with you is I've added the ability for people to list full season tickets. If you're on the Blue Pride waiting list, if you've dreamed of owning full season tickets for the Seahawks, I've got 2 sets of them available now. And in fact, they're both in the 100 level. And one of them is a set of 4 tickets that you can buy either 2 seats or you can buy 4 seats. And this is from Keith Thompson. These are the low section. They're undercover, so you don't get wet when it rains. Here's a picture of the tickets, so these are legit. And you can message Keith right here if you want within the system to ask him about these. And you could be the proud owner of full season tickets for the Seahawks. So I get nothing for this. There's no fees that I charge. It doesn't cost anything to register. It doesn't cost anything to list your tickets. And we've got literally hundreds of tickets for all sorts of games, including important divisional games against the 49ers, against the Rams, against the Cardinals. They're all available here. So head on over to hbtix.com, sign up if you haven't already, and list your tickets if you haven't already. We're going to keep improving this as we go, but I'm excited by, the initial. We've got over 1,000 people on there, and we've got literally hundreds of tickets already for sale there. So make sure you head over there and take advantage. All right, let's do this. You ready? Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's talk about the wide receivers in the NFC West. And we're going to do what I've done for every other position group ranking series in the series so far. By the way, I created a playlist on YouTube of all of the videos specifically ranking these different position groups. So you can see if you've missed it so far. I'll give you a little brief summary. Interior defensive tackles, so not edge players. I had the Seahawks ranked at the top of the division. And I'm just going to go through the Seahawks rankings. Tight ends, I had the Seahawks ranked 3rd out of the 4 teams for tight ends. And then yesterday, cornerbacks, I had the Seahawks as 1st in the division. So you can decide whether I'm biased or not, but I go through my reasons in those episodes and you can see more there. All right, so let's go through the different rooms. Let's start with the San Francisco 49ers. The San Francisco 49ers have, I'm just going to tell you who's there. They have Brandon Ayuk, Demarcus Robinson, who is a free agent signed from the Rams. There's a little bit of musical chairs going on in the division when it comes to the wide receiver rooms. Demarcus Robinson was with the Rams. He's now with the 49ers. I'm going to talk about some availability question marks with both of those guys in a bit. Ricky Pearsall, who was a 1st-round pick for them last year. Juwan Jennings, kind of the powerful slot receiver who plays a little bit on the outside from time to time. They've got Jacob Cowing, who had a decent showing last year, more as a returner, but also a player to watch there. And then they signed a couple of other guys that I'm not sure where they're going to fit in the roster. Isaiah Hodgins and Malik Knowles are a couple additional names. A guy that I think the 49ers fans are happy to not see on that list is Ronnie Bell, who was a former draft pick that really struggled for them. He's no longer on that roster. So again, we'll talk about this room. A lot of people think highly of this room. I think there's some real question marks, and we'll talk about why in a bit. Let's keep going. Let's go to the division champion, Los Angeles Rams. They waved goodbye to Cooper Kupp, and they said hello to Davante Adams, a player who is actually older than Cooper Kupp, but they believe has a lot left in the tank. Puka Nacua, we'll talk about where he fits in this overall divisional picture. Tutu Atwell, who they re-signed for $10 million, 1-year deal, and that's their kind of starting three. And then Jordan Whittington. I will talk more about Jordan Whittington. I think he is a guy that has a potential to play a prominent role in the division and for that team. Konata Mumfield is a rookie that they added. And then Britton Covey is a guy that they signed as a free agent. And then a few other people that I'm not sure are worth mentioning yet, but we'll see if I change my mind on that. So that is the Rams receiver room. All right, let's keep going. Let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals. Arizona Cardinals had maybe the best wide receiver prospect in history on their roster that they added last year. Marvin Harrison Jr., drafted very early in last year's draft, among what was expected to be a dominant wide receiver class with Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze and Brian Thomas Jr. and others. Can argue Marvin Harrison Jr. was maybe the third out of the four of those guys in terms of his rookie season, but we'll talk more about that in a second. Zay Jones is another player on the Cardinals wide receiver roster, at least currently listed as a starter. Michael Wilson, who has been, a consistent starter for them. He's listed as a slot receiver. I'm not sure Michael Wilson has spent more of his time in the slot. I see him more of as an outside player, but maybe I'm wrong. They signed Simi Fehoko from the Chargers as a free agent. Greg Dortch is a guy that's played a lot of different roles for them over the years. Andre Bachelia, hopefully I'm close on the pronunciation there, a guy that's played a little bit for them in the past. Quez Watkins is another guy that they signed as a free agent. And then Tehan Palmer. So a few different players there. Xavier Weaver, I'm not as familiar with. We'll take a look at him. But those are the receivers for the Arizona Cardinals. Last, certainly not least, well, we don't know. Maybe it will be least after I'm done with these rankings. You've got Jackson Smith and Jigba on the Seahawks. You've got Cooper Kupp coming over from the Rams. Marquez Valdez-Scantling coming from the Saints. And then after them, you've got Jake Bobo, Torrey Horton, the rookie receiver, as well as Ricky White, another rookie receiver. You've got Cody White, a guy that played some snaps for them last year. Derek Young, Steven Sims, who has been primarily a kick and punt returner, as other guys I think worth mentioning on that receiver group for the Seahawks. All right, so that's the kind of landscape, initially of who is in these rooms. As I did in the cornerback group, let's take a look at Field Vision Pro and see what Field Vision has in terms of some metrics for these players. All right, and where they finished last year. So if we take a look at Field Vision Pro, and by the way, I think those guys do great work over there. You've got some interest. This is a look at the wide receivers in the NFC West from last year by EPA per 100 and success rate. All right. So success rate is along the horizontal axis. EPA per 100 is along the vertical axis. Higher is better, to the right is better. The best receiver in the NFC West last year by both metrics was Puka Nacua. That was not a surprise to me. I don't know if it's a surprise to anybody else, but he was pretty clearly the best receiver in the division last year. Second in the division, also very clearly from at least these metrics, was Jackson Smith and Jigba. He ranked second in both of those metrics. Then we get into an interesting grouping for who were, the next four. Now, granted, these are guys that played in the NFC West last year, so there's some names that will not show up, like Davante Adams doesn't show up. We'll look at him another way. But another guy, Juwan Jennings, ranked 3rd in EPA per 100, 6th in success rate. I think Juwan Jennings was the best receiver for the 49ers last year. Brandon Ayuk was injured, but even when Brandon Ayuk was healthy, Juwan Jennings was a better player than Brandon Ayuk last year. The other player that's interesting to show here is Tutu Atwell. I don't know that many people would have guessed he would show up this high and then this quadrant of this 2x2. Tutu Atwell was 5th in EPA per 100 and 3rd in success percentage. So that's an interesting one and a player that they gave a fair amount of money to come back. Ricky Pearsall in his rookie season ranked 6th in EPA per 100 and 4th in success rate. So that's pretty good. And I think that's promising depending on your perspective of how important these metrics are. Well, obviously, you're not going to just look at these. We're going to look at some other ones. Greg Dortch, as I mentioned for the Cardinals, he's used in a number of different ways and had an interesting season for them. He was 7th in EPA per 100 and 5th in success rate. So that's the guys that kind of fit in the top quadrant of these rankings. There's some names there that are missing. And I kind of wonder, even though he's not in the division anymore, DK Metcalf was not a name that was listed there. And Deebo Samuel, also not in the division, not a name that was listed there. And as you look at this, you've got DK Metcalf all the way in the bottom left quadrant. He was 10th in EPA per 100 and 13th in success percentage. Deebo Samuel was the worst receiver in the division, at least based off of, I've got it limited on how many snaps. So of guys that played at least, a third of the snaps for the season, Deebo Samuel was the worst in the division at both EPA per 100 and success rate. But the other thing that's interesting, it's the other names that are in this bottom quadrant. Cooper Kupp was 12th in EPA per 100 and 12th in success. I don't know why. Well, Tyler Johnson, I guess, is not a guy we need to talk about. Brandon Ayuk, 9th in EPA, 8th in success rate. Demarcus Robinson, 8th in EPA, 9th in success rate. So I think that's pretty interesting. Michael Wilson was 13th in EPA, 7th in success, and Marvin Harrison Jr. was 4th in EPA, but 9th in success. So you've got a lot of the bigger names not showing up, at least by these metrics, as some of the better players. When we look at, let's actually bring it down even further to see guys that had fewer snaps, and I want to get, more guys into this list. So now we're down to guys that have played at least 10% of the snaps. So you're going to get guys that did not play very much. But the reason I wanted to look at this is because there's a guy that I'm pretty high on. I think has a chance to, this is heresy probably, I think maybe a more valuable player than Devontae Adams for the Rams when all is said and done. And that's Jordan Whittington. Jordan Whittington did not get a lot of snaps. He was mostly a returner, but he ranked 2nd in EPA and 2nd in success rate. When we go down, he, by these numbers, far outperformed even Puka Nacua. Now, again, when you're talking about guys like this, you've got to be realistic about, how many snaps you're talking about this getting. He had 28 targets last year and had 22 receptions for 293 yards. He did not have a touchdown, but he did have, a 78.6% catch rate. And the thing that I like about Jordan Whittington is he's pretty tough. So he's a guy that's going to get yards after the catch in a way that I think a lot of guys do not. I want to see if I can get this info from yard after catch per reception. Yeah, he averaged 9 yards after catch per reception. That's pretty darn good. In fact, I want to take a look within the division, or within the NFL, where did that rank? So if we go to receiving grades, we look at receivers, and we look at yards after catch per reception. And this is looking at, let's get a few more players here. I think this will, I think we might need to drop it down a little bit. Let's drop down to like 20 targets, at least 20 targets. Okay. Yeah. So Jordan Whittington was second in the NFL among all receivers in yards after catch per reception. I just think he's an interesting player, and I think his time is still coming. So he's a guy I would keep an eye on, and a guy that I don't think most people think about when they think about the Rams receiving corps. Another guy that is worth mentioning is Jacob Cowing, who was also a returner last year for the 49ers. He actually outranked Jordan Whittington when it came to EPA and success, but he also got very, very little playing time. So Jacob Cowing last year had 6 targets and 4 receptions for 80 yards. So, I mean, very, very small sample size, but for that sample size, he did pretty well. For what it's worth, Jordan Whittington last year had a 78.3 grade, a 78.9 receiving grade. He had a 78.9 pass blocking grade. He just does a lot of things, I think, well, and I think he is as big of a reason as any why they felt comfortable moving on from Cooper Kupp, because I think they feel like he's a guy they want to get more snaps for, and I just don't think enough people are talking about him. Jacob Cowing had a 62.4 grade from PFF last year. And as we look at, let me just look at wide receiver grades overall. And we're going to look just at the NFC West for a second. If we limit it to those guys, and let's bring in the Jets as well, since we'll get Davante Adams into that list. So Puka Nacua was the highest graded receiver last year. Jawan Jennings was second, and Jackson Smith and Jigua was third. Jordan Whittington was fourth. Garrett Wilson was fifth. Marvin Harris Jr. was sixth. Davante Adams was seventh. So again, these are other ways to kind of look at this, but I think yards after catch per reception is interesting. Yards per route run is a common one. Puka Nacua led the division in that number. Jordan Whittington was second. Jawan Jennings was third. Tutu Atwell was fourth. So, I think that also bears a little bit of mention when we're talking about these players. So let me go ahead and bring in all receivers, and let's cut it back so we don't have every single player. Let's get back to like guys that played at least 35% of the snaps. And we'll look at this in Field Vision Pro, and we'll look at some of these guys to see where they fall. So when we look at their threat ranking, this is one that is custom to Field Vision Pro. The top ranking receiver for the NFC West is Puka Nacua, who is third overall in this number. Jawan Jennings was sixth overall in this number. Tutu Atwell was ninth. As we keep going down the list, Justin Jefferson was 15th. So I have a little bit of question about this number, because I just don't think Justin Jefferson belongs 15th in any ranking relative to receivers. But we'll keep taking a look as we keep going down the list. You've got Davante Adams at 29th. He is basically the same as JSN, who is at 30th. Marvin Harrison Jr. was 32nd. Let's look at EPA per 100. By the way, Amon-Ra St. Brown is just all over these rankings. If we look at EPA per 100, and we go through these, Puka Nacua again, I think, is first in the division. And then you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba at 22nd. So he's second highest in the division. And from there, we already went through some of these when we went through just the divisional guys. Jawan Jennings would be the next. He's all the way down at 43rd. relative to the rest of the division. So, I mean, that's taking a look at some of these numbers and figuring out, where some of these guys rank. I think that let's return to the 49ers for a second, because one of the things that's a real issue for that team that I believe not everybody knows. I heard this first when Grant Cohen came on my show a week or two ago. I think it was just last week, and said he's not sure that Brandon Ayuk will be available for the first game of the season. And when I woke up this morning and I was looking online, I saw one of the Pro Football Doctor guys that actually has been relatively reputable say that he's not sure Brandon Ayuk is going to be the same player this year after coming back from ACL and MCL tears. It's a really serious knee injury that Brandon Ayuk had. And he also mentioned, he might be a PUP guy. He might start the season on PUP, which would mean he'd miss that first game of the year and maybe, obviously would miss more if he's on PUP. So I think that changes the calculus for that 49ers team quite a bit, depending on what his availability is going to be. And that's not it. So that's one guy. They also signed DeMarcus Robinson, who had a pretty good year for the Rams last year, had, I think, 7 or 8 touchdowns. Well, he had a violation with the NFL's substance abuse policy, and he's looking at a 3-game suspension to start the year from the NFL. And so, at least if you're a Seahawks fan, you're talking about the 49ers being potentially without Brandon Ayuk and DeMarcus Robinson for that first game up in Seattle. That would mean that their receiving core would be some combination of Ricky Pearsall, assuming he's healthy, which, by the way, that guy has been injured a lot. I'm not talking about the shootings. I'm just saying he's had hamstring and other soft tissue injuries over his career. Scared off some teams in the draft, but not the 49ers. Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, and then Jacob Cowing, Jordan Watkins. Like, I don't know what that room looks like without Brandon Ayuk and potentially without DeMarcus Robinson. And if you think about this further, Brandon Ayuk, it's a serious enough knee injury that if he's missing time to begin the year, the likelihood that he's going to be his old self is low. And then you look at his performance last year, and Brandon Ayuk was he was not the same player when he came back last year. He wasn't even coming back from injury. He was coming back from a holdout. And his success rate as one measure, he went from 71% success rate as a receiver in 2023 to 48% in 2024. He went from 84 yards per game receiving to 53 yards per game receiving. He went from 71% catch rate to 53% catch rate. And he just wasn't the same guy. And that was before the injury. Now you're talking about a serious injury. And you got some weird tweets coming from him about the team and about various things. I just don't know that there are people that are going to say Brandon Ayuk is this great receiver where he used to be one. I'm not sure he is anymore. And I'm certainly not sure he is for this season. And so if Brandon Ayuk is not good or not available, I think that has a pretty serious effect on this 49ers receiver room. And DeMarcus Robinson, I like DeMarcus Robinson as a guy that made a lot of plays against the Seahawks last year. I don't know that DeMarcus Robinson is a guy that you can count on to be more than just kind of a role player. And then what you're doing is you're forcing Jawan Jennings to be your number one target and Ricky Pearsall to make a big leap in his second season. You know, Demarcus Robinson had, I think, 35 catches last year for 600 yards. He did have 7 touchdowns. As far as his advanced numbers, like, they're not super great. And he also is 31 years old. So, I don't know that you can really count on him either. I think that what the 49ers really need, what they really need is for Ricky Pearsall to be great. They need Ricky Pearsall to have the kind of career trajectory that Jackson Smith and Jigba did from his first year to his second year, becoming like a dude. And he might. Like, Ricky Pearsall is a crazy athlete. I really, really liked him coming out last year. He showed some promise. He's tough. I don't know if he's ready to be a number one receiver in his second season. And I'm not sure that he gives them what Brandon Ayuk used to give them. And then whatever you think of Deebo Samuel, and I think it's fine to think Deebo Samuel's best days are well behind him. Well, Deebo Samuel used to be a very big part of this offense, and he's not there either. So I think the 49ers room has a lot of question marks. If we go into the Rams room, I've talked a lot about Jordan Whittington, so I don't need to spend more time there. We've talked a little bit about Tutu Atwell. I think he's a quality player. I think the starting 3 for them of Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, and Tutu Atwell, I think is pretty clearly the best in the division. I don't think there's much question there. Puka Nacua is the best receiver in the division. And then Devontae Adams has at times during his career been the best receiver in the NFL. He's not that anymore. I don't think he is that close to the player he once was. I also think him in the Sean McVay offense could be interesting. Last year, he had 67 catches for 854 yards and 7 touchdowns. He averaged, 77 yards per game. His catch rate was 58%. And this is down from, 60% a couple years ago. But it's been 2 years since he had a 1,000-yard season. It's been 2 years since he's had over 80 catches in a season. It's been a few years since he was a Pro Bowl level player. I think, he is 32 years old. He's not the same guy. I think people give him too much credit. But even with that in mind, he's still a quality player. I don't think he's a guy that you're like, oh man, that's a hole. That's a weakness on that receiving group. I just think his ceiling might not be as high as it once was. And then Tutu Atwell is, I think, a promising young receiver who's made some big plays for them. I don't think any problem. And I've talked up Jordan Whittington enough. So I think that this room, I'll be surprised if I don't end up with them as the top group in the division, but let's keep going. If we look at the Cardinals receiver room, I mean, Zay Jones, what do we think about Zay Jones? He played for Arizona last year. He had 8 catches in 11 targets. The year before in Jacksonville, he had 34 catches and 62 targets. 2 years ago, he had 95 catches and 137 targets. So he's had, at least one big year. He's never had more than 6 touchdowns in a season. He's never had a receiving grade higher than 70. He's 30 years old. I don't know, man. Is Zay Jones really going to be a starter for that team as currently what is listed? That would be pretty uninspiring. I think Xavier Weaver is another guy that I know there's been some chatter about. And Xavier Weaver is 6'1", 180 pounds. He is an undrafted free agent last year for the Cardinals. I mean, he had no receptions. He had 2 targets. It's a big projection to think that Xavier Weaver is going to be something more than just a dude. And then, I mean, Greg Dortch, I think he's fine. But I'm looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson are cement. Like they're starters. They're clear starters. I'm not sure I see a guy that's really a third starter. Greg Dortch can be kind of that guy, and maybe we'll end up with the most snaps outside of the top 2. But if we go back and if I look at Arizona Cardinals targets last year, let's just look at targets. And, obviously Trey McBride's top, but for receivers, 116 for Marvin Harrison Jr., 71 for Michael Wilson, and then Greg Dortch was third with 50. After that, I mean, it goes all the way down to Zay Jones with 11. So, I mean, it's really, I think you look at it as Greg Dortch, Michael Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. was okay last year. He was not great. He was okay. And what do I mean by okay? He had 62 catches for 885 yards. He had 8 touchdowns. That's good. But he only had a 50% success rate. He only had a 53% catch rate. The chemistry between him and Kyler Murray was not good. It did not look like a good match. They're going to have to make a big leap for him to be not just a good player, but a dominant one. He's talented enough. That's certainly not out of the question, but it is a question. And then Michael Wilson, I don't think Michael Wilson has some other level to reach. I think Michael Wilson was a good player last year, 47 catches, 548 yards, 4 touchdowns. But that's pretty uninspiring in terms of total numbers. And I question the ceiling of this room for the Cardinals. I think there's a lot riding on Marvin Harrison Jr. being an elite number 1 receiver. I'm not sure. I think he might be capable of that. I'm not sure if he's capable of that with Kyler Murray. So I think there's a lot of questions. He put on all this muscle. I'm not convinced that receivers putting on a lot of muscle is necessarily historically shown to be something that helps you succeed, as opposed to improving your route running or your catching or your speed or anything else. But we'll see. He certainly put in work in the offseason to remake his body, and we'll see how that plays out. So let's talk about the Seahawks. Jackson Smith-Njigba obviously had a breakout year for Seattle last year. He goes from a rookie season where there were people, and even into the beginning of last season, where people were like, he's a disappointment. He wasn't worth a first-round pick, to having 100 catches, nearly breaking the Seahawks franchise record for receptions in a season, over 1,100 yards receiving and 6 touchdowns, and had a 73% catch rate. So he's an efficient player, made the Pro Bowl, is now in the conversation for, is he a true number 1? Is he a guy that can be like Chris Olave was at his prime, or some of the other Ohio State players, Garrett Wilson in his, prime years? Obviously those guys are still young enough to be in their prime, but their best seasons, can he be one of those kinds of players? I think the answer is yes. I don't think Jackson Smith-Njigba is one of the easiest players to project in the division. He's going to be good. He's young. He's incredibly talented. He's a great route runner. He's got great hands. Those guys are, once they demonstrate that the skill set that they used in college translates to the pros, those guys are pretty reliable in terms of understanding what you're going to get from them. So I think JSN is, I think you should mark him down for having similar production from an efficiency standpoint. The Seahawks aren't going to pass as much as they did last year, so his overall numbers, who knows? but his actual efficiency numbers, I think, should be right in line. And then from there, the biggest question, like, I don't know if it's the biggest question in the division. It's one of the biggest questions for the Seahawks is Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp, by a lot of advanced metrics, was not very good last year. And he's had injury issues. And so if you're talking about a guy that, quite honestly, took a step backwards last year, and the Rams willingly parted ways with a guy that's been a key part of their franchise. He is 32 years old. He's younger than Devontae Adams, but he is still on the older side. And he really slowed down as the season went on. His last 5 games, if you include the playoffs, well, let's just say the last 3 games of the regular season into the wild card game, he had 5 catches in 10 targets, like over 4 games. That's not good. It's not good. And he kind of, from at least PFF grading, he dropped off after kind of week 11. He had been pretty good to start the year, got injured, came back and did okay, but generally speaking was kind of not the same player that he'd been. Now, he had in 2022, a couple years ago, an 86 grade, 88 as a receiver, 77.6 pass blocking, right? Well, it was 71.5 in 2023. It was in 2024, 71.4. He's still a goodish player, but not a great player. And I don't know how he is going to work out in this offense and what he's got left to offer, but that's going to be something to watch. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is a guy that anyone outside of Seattle is just going to kind of not think much of. The guy's had drop problems for a lot of his career. He washed out with the Bills. It wasn't a good fit for either party last year, but then he went to New Orleans and he had 17 catches and 4 touchdowns in what was 7 starts. So I'm looking at his snap counts now. He was a guy that let's make sure I got it right. He had eight games where he got at least 30 snaps. So within those, he had, like I said, he had 17 catches and 4 touchdowns. So he really kind of came alive in this offense. That's the reason he said he came here, because it was the best he played since he's been in the NFL. And it showed. He had his highest receiver grade. It was just 65 from PFF, but still his highest receiver grade since he's been in the NFL. So he's a guy that I think is a question mark, but I don't think the floor is very low for him. I just think that he's not going to be a high production guy. You're not going to get a ton of targets and catches. He's going to be someone who's kind of a stretch X who is targeted in certain moments and is there for a specific purpose. I think one of the biggest questions for this team is Torrey Horton, 5th round pick, 4.3 40 speed, extremely fast, extremely athletic, would have been a definitely top 100 pick if he didn't have the injury that he had his senior year or his last year in college, but he was already running prior to the combine. He will be back, I would expect, sometime probably early on in training camp. He's a guy that could very much change the dynamic of that receiver room for the Seahawks in a way that I don't think there's any other rookies in the division that can. And then there's Ricky White. I don't have as high of expectations for Ricky White based on what I've seen so far. I think he's more practice squad kind of guy. Cody White is a guy that could play a role in this and made the most of his opportunities when he got them last year. Steven Sims, the returner, is a guy that has not made a name for himself as a receiver, but looked pretty good during minicamp and OTAs. I'm not going to really put much on Derek Young. I'm not sure there's a clear path for him as there has been in last year in past years. So we'll see about that. But JSN's kind of a sure thing. And then you got a lot of question marks for Seattle. You got a lot of question marks. I think the floor is high for Cooper Kupp. I don't think he's going to be a terrible player, but I'm not sure the ceiling is very high. And that's something we have to find out. And honestly, I think the team needs to find out. Torrey Horton's a guy that I think could play a meaningful role. Jake Bobo is a guy that could take a step forward. But it's a question mark room for sure. So where am I with my rankings? I think as I look at it, as I said, Rams to me, the clear number one. Clear number one. It's kind of like the cornerback room that I did that show and had the Seahawks as very clearly number one. And then the other rooms were kind of in a bunch. The Rams are the clear number one. Number two, I mean, number two is kind of tough. I mean, honestly, I think if we're looking at just individual receivers, I think I would take JSN as the second best receiver after Puka Nacua in the division. And that holds some weight. Could Marvin Harrison Jr. be that? Sure, maybe he could. I don't think Juwan Jennings or Ricky Pearsall really are likely to be that level of player, but maybe. If I look at who's got the next best duo of receivers, I mean, Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, I like really don't know what to do with Brandon Ayuk. I'm kind of looking at him as an empty spot. I just don't think that you can count on him this season. And when he's there, I'm not sure you can count on him being a quality player. I kind of, so hard. I don't want to overdo this. I kind of end up with the Seahawks at number 2 because would you rather have JSN, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Cooper Kupp, Torrey Horton, like some combination of those guys, or Brandon Ayuk, Ricky Pearsall, and Juwan Jennings? I don't know. For the Cardinals, I think the Cardinals are a pretty middling group, and there's so much that Marvin Harrison has to do that he hasn't yet done. Michael Wilson is who he is. I don't think he's going to take a big jump. They're kind of a one receiver team with like a couple of role players. Man, I think what I'll do, I think I'm going to give the 49ers, I'm going to rank them second. Demarcus Robinson, when he's back, is a little bit more of a sure thing, has more production than some of these other guys. But it's tough. I mean, putting Pearsall and Jennings above JSN and Cooper Kupp feels wrong. Man. All right, I'm going to redo. I'm going to put the Seahawks as number 2. I'll put the 49ers as number 3, and I'll put the Cardinals at number 4. I don't know, man. Those bottom 3 teams, I think you could rank them in almost any order, and I think there's an argument to be made for all of them. I'm curious what you guys all think, how you'd rank them. So that's where I'm at after my initial rankings. Let's see what PFF says. I have not looked at PFF's rankings. I've got a few different rankings from PFF. The first I'm going to look at is their list of just best receivers. And this is the 32 best receivers going into the season, ranked 1 through 32. They've got Puka Nacua as number 5. That's the top in the division. So that matches everything we've heard so far. The next highest in the division, Devontae Adams at 16. So they have 5 and 16. And then after that, they have Brandon Ayuk at 19. What is the explanation for that? Ayuk was one of the NFL's top receivers in 2023, finishing with a 92 receiving grade, 18 yards per reception. However, his efficiency production dipped in 2024, and now he enters the upcoming season fresh off ACL, MCL tears. I don't know, man. I think that is a Very bold ranking. So I don't agree, but this is good to get someone else's ranking. Where is JSN? They've got Marvin Harrison Jr. at 26. They've got JSN below Marvin Harrison Jr. Some might argue Smith-Njigba deserves a higher spot on this list, and in certain areas, such as his 97.2 receiving grade against zone coverage and strong yards after catch production, the case is there. However, his 78.7 grade against single coverage falls short of others he's compared to in a ranking. That said, this isn't a knock on his talent. He's a highly skilled receiver with the potential for a breakout year in Seattle's new. He had a breakout year. That's bull. That's terrible. I don't know, man. The 78.7 grade against single coverage is an interesting number. Marvin Harrison Jr., it felt underwhelming at times, but it was far from poor. He had a 91.8 grade against single coverage, highlighting his ability to win one-on-one matchups as a true one-on-one receiver. So what? They don't have anyone new to change coverage. Like, they didn't add any other receivers. It's going to be the same group of receivers requiring the same. Like, the reason that his overall grade was in the 70s is because he wasn't single covered that much, which implies like you'd need to add some additional weapon beyond Trey McBride that they already had last year to force teams to not double cover Marvin Harrison Jr. And I don't see why that's going to happen. So I disagree pretty strongly with that ranking, but this is why I want to look at other people's perspectives. So based on that, the Rams had two in the top, the two highest ranking. And then the 49ers had the next highest with Ayuk at 19. And then the Cardinals and then the Seahawks. So maybe they would have the 49ers second. We're going to go and see because they actually have a ranking of receiving core. Like, this is the whole receiving room. So where do they rank? They have the 49ers at number 5. They have the 49ers number 5. Okay, this is a little misleading because they are including tight end and running back. So I can't look at this ranking because it's very misleading. They're including Christian McCaffrey. They're including George Kittle. So I don't think that's that useful. They do have the Rams at 8. And they have the Cardinals at 18. Of course, they have Trey McBride as part of that and James Conner. They have the Seahawks at 20. So they have the Seahawks. I mean, honestly, I don't think it's crazy to have the Seahawks as 4th in the division. First, I really don't. But I had a hard, like, for me, the Brandon Ayuk thing, a lot of people seem to think more highly of him coming off of what he did last year and his injuries than I do. I think that's a huge story that's left to be told. Let's take a look to see what our buddy Mike Clay over at ESPN did for his wide receiver rankings. This is just receivers. He has got the Rams at a 9. So he has the Rams tied for the top ranked receiver room in the NFL. So he and I think, are in the same mind there. He has got the Arizona Cardinals at a 4. He has got the San Francisco 49ers at a 4. And he's got the Seahawks at a 6. All right. So I'm not totally crazy. Mike Clay has the same basic ranking that I do for the receiver rooms in the division. Take that for what it's worth, which might not be a lot, but it's something. And hey, we're in the news desert part of the NFL offseason. So hopefully, it's worth at least a debate and some good conversation. So a couple things that I'll just say that in addition to what we've already covered. DK Metcalf was a guy for the Seahawks last year who was a big, deep threat, certainly commanded a lot of attention from coverage. One of the things that he didn't do, he was one of the worst red zone receivers in the NFL over his career. Cooper Kupp has been one of the best red zone receivers in the NFL over his career. I don't think you can underestimate the impact of that. I also think that, I'll keep coming back to it, the guys in this division in the receiver room that could make or break these teams' opportunities and their hopes that nobody's going to talk about. Jordan Whittington, Torrey Horton, Jacob Cowing are the three guys that come to mind for me as guys that could make or break things in the division. And then on the Cardinals, I don't think there is a guy to me that clearly is, could step in and make a huge, but those are guys for me that are names that no one's going to talk about that could play meaningful roles in how the receiver room figures for each of those teams this year. All right. What have other people said? Where did people, am I crazy? I'm looking at chat now, and people wondering about Tyler Lockett. I didn't really go into Tyler's numbers because he's no longer with the Seahawks. Finley Fairclaw, if the 49ers have a down year again, then that franchise has a lot of problems, big contract, aging players, and stale management. Yes, that is for sure. And Sean S. says, Cooper Kupp is not just a player on the field. He's like literally having another coach as well. He's going to be tremendous for the younger players and getting them even better. I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. Nicole Allen says, Devontae Adams sucks now the same way Julio and D-Hop and Larry does. And Puka is only slightly more reliable, but you could argue he's not because he's more injury prone. And even when JSN gets injured, he plays through it. It's a fair perspective. We get from Vince Ochoa, your ranking seems correct, to be honest. Sean says, who's a member, says, I would lean towards Seattle at number 2 in the division, more about what Arizona and San Francisco are not than what the Hawks are. That's kind of where I am at. Like, if you've heard me talk about concerns when I came out of OTAs and minicamp, I'm just not sure it's a very dynamic receiver room for the Seahawks. It's one of my maybe top concerns for this team. So I'm not super high on the Seahawks receiver room. Torrey Horton has not yet stepped on the field. I'm looking forward to seeing if he changes that calculus at all. But I'm telling you, man, the 49ers situation, expectations versus reality could be a disaster. It could be a real problem. And if Juwan Jennings or Ricky Pearsall go down for any period of time while Brandon Ayuk is injured, I think that offense is going to really, really struggle. So that's my take. That's my take on those. Appreciate everybody who's tuned in. If you haven't given the show a like, click subscribe. Please do go to patreon.com/hawkblogger. Sign up now. Get free ad-free audio for this show every single day. Get access to the Discord channel where you can talk Seahawks, these rankings, Mariners, all sorts of things while the show is going on, after the show, in between shows. And you also get verified at hbtix.com when you do. The other thing is, it's been a while since I've talked to you guys about it, but you really should head over to jkboots.com. These are the best boots I have ever owned. They've been the best boots you will ever own. Like, they're handmade in Spokane, Washington, family-owned company. If you use code HAWKBLOGGER, HAWKBLOGGER, you get $75 off. $75 off. The best boots you'll ever own. You will love these boots. And we're also giving away $15 for every purchase to the Wildland Firefighters Foundation. So Northwest Forest firefighters get the proper equipment, the proper footwear, everything they need, safety gear to keep them safe, to protect Northwest Forest. And as you know, there have been cuts to the budgets for forest firefighters. This is a great way to get something for yourself and also give back to people that protect this great part of the planet. So code HawkBlogger at jkboots.com. Make sure you give it a go. All right, folks. That'll do it for today's episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Like I said, make sure you click the bell to get notified because I don't know exactly when I'm going to go live each day. I've got some really cool guests coming up. Talking to a few different folks. I'm not going to tell you who, but I've got some fun guests in the hopper. So those will be coming up in the next week or so. Until I see you next, have a great rest of your Thursday. I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been an episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.